Hi, everyone. I'm Thomas Howard, one of the technical marketing engineers for the ICE team, and really excited to be talking with you about ICE and Meraki today. So these are the different things that we're going to cover. First, for those that may not know about Cisco Meraki, I wanted to go through kind of how that is a little bit different in terms of how it's a cloud managed platform and how that works with our dashboard. Want to talk about why you would want to use ICE with Meraki because it does have some of the access control capabilities that ICE has. So it lets you understand what the differences are. And then we will get into some of the capabilities of the Meraki hardware itself, how that's similar or different from other platforms that ICE supports, whether it's from Cisco or other vendors. And then I would like to show you some demos and get into how access control works with some of these different platforms for wired, wireless, and VPN, and even the Systems Manager MDM tool. And finally, a lot of this is all supported by APIs and automation. And so the demos that you're going to be seeing are actually done today with ICE and Amazon Web Services using a virtual Meraki MX and for VPN connectivity to secure our radius tunnels. And I'll actually be doing a demo also with Azure AD in the cloud. So we're trying to do ICE in the cloud with Meraki in the cloud and Azure in the cloud, trying to get all the clouds covered today as much as possible as part of this. So hopefully you guys will like it. The first thing we wanted to talk about is uh, do you have Meraki and ICE? Do you have both? Only one? Which one? Or none? And you're interested. So Rigo just popped a poll question up for you to answer. We'd love to hear where you all are at with ICE and Meraki. While that's going on, I'm going to go on to the next slide and start talking about Meraki and the dashboard. So as I said, Cisco Meraki is a cloud managed platform. The really cool thing is you just take an account, you get set up, and you have access to our dashboard. Inside of there, you can have one or more organizations that you belong to, and you manage networks inside of there. And I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later. But essentially, you have a bunch of different devices, whether it's switches for wireless, access points for wireless. They even have some camera options. But then there's also the security and SD-WAN platforms, which enable you to do VPN hub and spoke connectivity to your different branches or teleworker, small office environments, things like that. So those are kind of all the different components, and you can bring them all together using this dashboard. And like I said earlier, almost all the features are covered by APIs, so you can control these and provision these quickly and easily with scripts, like I've done. So before we get to this next poll question, Rigo, what do they say about the first poll?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. So in looking at these results, I do see that Meraki only is held by most participants. And then next down the line, we have those that have both Meraki and ICE, and then those that have ICE only.
Excellent. Okay, good. Well, so there's some opportunities for people to understand why they would want to use ICE with their Meraki, so that's fantastic. And then those of you with Meraki and ICE, maybe we're going to show you something new you haven't done today. And then those with ICE only, we're going to hopefully give you some insights on some other networking options for you for your environments. So good. That's exactly why we wanted to find that out to kind of understand where people were at with Meraki and ICE. So then the next question we want to ask is, what are you doing with Meraki specifically? Because I'm trying to show some different things here today. So the next poll question Rico just popped is, what are you doing? Wired, wireless, VPN, MDM, or all the above, or nothing? I think we already know the answer is quite a few things, but we're going to find out in this poll question. While that's going on, I would like to kind of talk about why you would want to use ICE with Meraki. As I said, Meraki already has a lot of built-in access control capabilities. So for many people, just as we just found in the poll, some of you aren't using ICE with Meraki because it does probably much of what you need. But there may be some scenarios that you're contemplating or maybe you didn't know about that you could do if you had ICE to go with it. So probably the number one thing I should have put identity stores up there too, but Active Directory domains and just identity stores in general, I think those two are the biggest differentiators between using just Meraki or integrating it with ICE. You have a lot more flexibility with ICE. Meraki does have the ability to do Active Directory and LDAP, but it's typically tied to a single SSID with a splash page. Whereas in ICE, you can actually map up to 50 Active Directory join points to multiple domains or forests. And then you also have the ability using identity store sequences in ICE so that you can chain these different domains or identity stores together so that if you're trying to authenticate a user and maybe you have different or multiple business groups, maybe your company just made an acquisition and you need to query multiple AD domains or different stores, you have the ability to do that. So another one is maybe you're moving from on-prem to off-prem and need to, or should I say the cloud, between on-premise Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. That's another thing that we can support with ICE, because we are starting to get a lot of questions about people moving to Azure Active Directory. And that's one of the things I'm going to be showing you today as part of this demo. Then in terms of the next biggest thing, I think, is probably the multi-vendor deployment. So obviously Meraki is only concerned with configuring Meraki, right? And working with their gear in terms of their splash pages and things. With ICE, we support Radius and TACACS, and therefore we will support any networking device that talks those protocols. And then for the other things, the customized portals, the logins, the guest capabilities, those are all pretty much on par in terms of the basic capabilities. But then ICE does have a lot of other, just so many different features to control the guest flow that Meraki doesn't have, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like a little bit later. And then when it comes to the MDM, Meraki does have their Meraki Systems Manager, but you're not limited to that. Their hardware will actually, you can run other MDMs on top of it. You just can't manage it within the Meraki dashboard. ICE lets you integrate not only the Meraki Systems Manager, but also 13 other MDM partners, right? So we have lots of, all the industry-leading MDM vendors we work with to do compliance, posture, certificate provisioning to your endpoints, things like that. And then finally, if you didn't know, ICE really glues together the enterprise networking side of things with wired and wireless VPN access control, along with your different security applications to do improved firewalling with policy-based access or group-based access, I should say. The ability to do vulnerability assessment and threat-centric NAC and all these different things. We have over 100 Cisco Security Technology Alliance partners that we work with to do these kinds of integrations so that when endpoints come into the network, you can begin to do vulnerability scans and other security services that, ICE can't do these. You need to rely on other security services. And so we have that capability using PX Grid, the platform exchange grid, and Meraki really doesn't have anything like that. All they have is, they have some vendors to help, customize splash pages and stuff. So if you're looking to do a little bit more beyond just basic access control, get into more security integration, ICE can also help you there. So hopefully this page kind of helps you understand all of that and gives you some things to think about. So Rigo, what do they say on their poll? What Meraki devices are they using? What scenarios?
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So for the second poll question, I do see that the top answer shows that everything is in use with Meraki.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then I see that both wireless and VPN were actually very close to a tie, but wireless actually has a slight edge there for the second
Yeah.
top spot, and VPN is in third.
No surprise. Obviously, wireless, you need to secure your wireless for access control. And then VPN, I mean, if the last year hasn't been just a boom for VPN, it's never been better for VPN access. So no surprise that those two are in the top. So I'm going to show you wired and wireless. I'm not going to show VPN today, just because I don't think there's enough time, and I want to show the more traditional wired and wireless stuff. I do want to show you some of the teleworker stuff though, because I think that is important for remote access. So we'll go through that here shortly. So just as a quick reminder for people wondering, in general, ISE supports TACACS and Radius protocols. So any network device that supports these protocols, ISE can talk to it, right? So it's not just Meraki, it's other third-party vendors, the entire Cisco lineup, all kinds of things. And we mention this in the ISE compatibility guides just to make it really clear for everybody. But we get this question all the time because people think if they don't see their specific hardware and software release in an ISE compatibility guide, they think, oh my God, it's not supported. But that's not the case, right? We go for protocol compatibility, and then everything else is what I would consider to be the platform capabilities, which we'll get into here in a bit from Meraki. So given what I just said, Meraki does not have TACACS because they do all of their management inside of this dashboard, right? So you have full control over your organizations, who can be your administrator, what privileges your administrators have over the different Meraki networks that you configure. And you can also tag things like switch ports. And based on the tag configurations, your different administrators are able to do full read-write access, read-only, monitor, all these different things based on the switch ports that you tag. So this is really nice if you have different administrators in different regions or areas, or different parts of the company doing different functions. They can be in charge of their switches and their switch ports compared to folks in other part of the company. So that's how Meraki does it. They don't support TACACS, but they do have Radius, and we'll get into that a lot later on. One other thing Meraki has is this idea of cloud authentication. So if you are looking to get a quick start, many of you, it sounds like you've been using Meraki for a while, so I'm sure you've already used this feature. So if you need to do a quick guest account or something, you have the ability to do that. You don't need to rely on any other Active Directory domain or other thing. ISE also has the ability to provision guest accounts similarly to this. The one thing I will say that is different here is you have to do these accounts in Meraki Cloud Authentication one at a time, whereas ISE offers you the ability to create, I think it's 100 or 200 accounts at a time. You can do either random accounts, or you can submit a CSV file with users' names and email addresses and things like that, and it will bulk create guest accounts for you. So if that's something you're looking to do, that may be another area where ISE could help you if you're looking to do events and give people wireless credentials for your events. All right, so we're going to get into these different environments. A lot of you have Meraki gear, so this should be familiar, but for anybody that's not familiar with the Meraki gear, I just wanted to give you a quick overview. So starting in the upper left-hand corner, the MX series appliances, those are your SD-WAN, VPN router type devices, and those basically help you establish secure tunnels from branch to branch or site to site. And they terminate the tunnels. You can do auto VPN and all that good stuff. And then down below that, you have the MR, or the wireless access points. And those obviously you can deploy behind the MX SD-WAN VPNs, and your traffic can travel between different sites that way. Or you can actually deploy the wireless APs standalone as like a you can do one or two of them in a small office or a home office, and they can actually tunnel traffic. They can do everything they need to do in terms of authentication. They can do all that right from the office. You don't need to have other things there. So that's really interesting, the ability to do something like that. Then we have the switches, which I think everybody knows about switches. You've probably been using those a lot, doing network access control. And then when it comes to the teleworkers, there's another option for you, which they call the Z3 series. And there's a Z3 and a Z3C, which also has like a cellular connection. And I should have mentioned, but the MX also has a cellular option in case you have an environment where the internet connection goes down a lot. But it has a cellular option. So if you're like me and you have to do a lot of demos, it's nice to have that cellular option to be able to do your demo from anywhere and not have to worry about getting internet access. But those boxes have the ability to do, there's one internet port, and then there's 4 regular ports you can plug things into, including one power over Ethernet port. And the one I have will actually do a full PoE plus power output to my Meraki AP and power it up. So that's pretty impressive in terms of the power output on that little box. So you can use this, like I said, in a small office, home office, teleworker type environment, and those are great to have. So these are the things that I want to be able to go through and show you today, and show you some network access control things with ICE. One more thing I will mention is that ICE does have endpoint profiles capability. So if you plug in a Meraki device, I should be able to get the profile and understand what it is and tell you that it's an AP or a switch or whatever. The Cisco Meraki device, I believe, is what we're doing for the cameras currently. They don't have quite enough information to differentiate all the new Meraki cameras that they have available. So with that, let's get into the hardware and software capabilities. So the first thing I wanted to go through is talk about the different ICE access control scenarios. So you see across the top, you see AAA, profiling, bring your own device, guest, things like that. These are all the major ICE scenarios. And then in the rows, we have the Meraki MR wireless, the MS switch, and the MX VPN concentrators. And I should have put the Z3 along with the MX. They have pretty much the same capabilities there, in case you were wondering. So you'll notice that everything is pretty much the same here. There's a couple things I want to call out. The first one is here with this little footnote caveat with the no downloadable ACLs. So the thing I would mention about this is the Meraki switches absolutely support access control lists. They do it using what's called a group policy in Meraki. You cannot do downloadable access control lists from ICE. So that's something that you typically do on a Catalyst switch. Meraki doesn't do that. It's basically pre-configured in their policy, and we just assign a radius filter ID, and then it applies an access control list. So the switches are capable of doing ACLs, you just can't download it. So minor detail, but otherwise the full enforcement capability is there. I just want to make sure you understood that. And the other little caveat, we call it out here, I don't think it's a big deal. Basically, you can't do local web authentication on a switch. I don't know anybody in their right mind that would want to do local web auth on the switch, so I don't think that's a big deal, but we just call it out as a caveat anyway. And then when it comes to the MX, obviously you don't have the URL redirection capabilities, and that's why you can't do this. And then you don't have the ability to do the radius change of authorization, and so that's why you can't do posture or MDM over here. And then when it comes to TrustSec, some of the platforms can do the Cisco TrustSec or software-defined micro-segmentation capabilities. Some of them can do it. It's very hardware specific. The higher end platforms, the newer, the Wi-Fi 6 APs, and the Meraki MS390 can do TrustSec just fine, but the lower end ones don't have the hardware to do it. So that's why it's sort of a half green there. You don't get a full check mark on those. So it just depends on the specific platform, which we'll get into on the next slide. And then finally, the MX, we just don't have the capabilities in the MX. So all of these details are spelled out at this URL. If you want to go there, we have the capabilities not only for Meraki, but we also have it for the Catalyst switches and even some third parties. So check those out. And we'll go on to the next slide, which talks about the actual individual features for the platforms and their software. So we've kind of arranged this in terms of the wireless capabilities across the top here. Then we have that teleworker Z3. Then we have the switching, and then we have the SD-WAN. So we'll just kind of go through those. So starting with wireless, you can see that can pretty much do everything except the profiling capabilities. So just about anything you want to do, right? Fully capable of doing that. The one thing is these lower end platforms cannot do what's called the Meraki adaptive policy. That's that trust set capability I was talking about earlier. Because again, lower end platforms, you can't do that. But the higher end ones, you certainly can. The Z3s, remember, it's more of a router VPN platform, so you can't do the more advanced URL redirection guest type stuff. It's not meant for that. It's meant to be just more of a personal teleworker small office device. But it can do 802.1x, MAB, and even the group-based ACLs. Then when it comes to the switches, you can see they pretty much do everything with the exception of these lower end switches where you don't get the ability to do access control lists, I'm sorry, because they're layer 2 switches. So you only get L2, you don't get layer 3 and layer 4 capability, right? So that's pretty obvious. And then adaptive policy, you're only, whoops, there we go. I guess I moved my mouse a little bit too much on that. You only get that on the higher end Meraki MS390. So this is really the flagship switch. If you're looking for an enterprise class switch, the MS390 does everything. And that includes the ability to do the software-defined segmentation starting in version 14, as well as even the device sensor capabilities that the Catalyst switches have. We have that capability in the Meraki switches as well. And in the new version 15 of the switch release in Meraki, you're going to have the ability to do URL redirect as well as group policy ACLs and NetFlow v9. So that really lets you export a lot of the flows to something like a Stealth Watch to understand what kind of traffic your users are, what they're doing on the network, what your devices are doing, and be able to respond to that. So really cool options there. And then again, on the SD-WAN side, again, these are meant to be VPN devices. So all this URL redirection, group-based policy stuff, they don't really do that, but you do have the option if somebody plugs in to go ahead and lock it down in terms of 802.1x or MAC-off bypass. So that's an option for you. And then this last row is the virtual MX, right? It's basically just a one port in, one port out virtually kind of thing. So you're not going to do any of this stuff on those. That's why you see the dashes at the bottom. So hopefully this helps you understand the different Meraki platforms and their capabilities. Kind of help you plan out if there's something that you think Meraki would fit for you and your access control needs. This is going to help get you there. All right, so then just a reminder, I wanted to cover some of these different scenarios in terms of remote work, because I think this is really one of the biggest needs of our time right now. I'm sure if you're like me and my colleagues, we're all working from home right now, and we probably aren't going to go into the office anytime soon either. So I wanted to go through some of these scenarios because I think this is where Meraki has really excelled over the last 2 years. The ability to support people in small office, remote work environments has been exceptional. Their response in the pandemic was fantastic. A lot of hospitals ordered a lot of these pieces of gear because they were able to quickly deploy them and provision them remotely without having to go on site, other than plugging in a couple of cables, right? They've been great for that. And then as all of our workers are now working remotely and at home, we don't have the kind of visibility and control that we could normally get. And so the ability to have Meraki Systems Manager as an MDM on their mobile devices to help control it, keep it patched, right, with all the new malware coming out, that's also a great thing. So I think this is where Meraki can help solve a lot of problems for people, and that's why I want to talk about it. So quick reminder, this is my basic lab setup as we go through some of these demos. If you're wondering how I'm doing all this stuff, reminder, I've got ICE sitting out in Amazon Web Services. We are securing the radius traffic going back into a couple of different small branches. One is my lab here in my home. So I've got the Meraki MX, which is securing the tunnel and then providing connectivity for the MR wireless, the MR46 access point and an MS390 switch. And then I also have a little teleworker Thomas box, a little Z3 that I can plug into and I can connect to wirelessly and show you guys some different demos there. So with that, let's talk about the VPN. All right, so that's my cue for a demo. So let me switch over and I'm actually going to show you the Meraki dashboard here real quick. And I'm going to show you not my switch, but I'm going to show you my my MX appliance. So as I mentioned in the dashboard, you have the ability to select your network. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Meraki Dashboard, in fact, let me make this a little bit larger for you. You can see I have a home network. I have my ICE in AWS. That's actually considered a network as well. Then I have my lab network and I have my teleworker Thomas network. So you can see the way Meraki does it is pretty much each, you can think of it as a small office or branch office device, any kind of an MX or a teleworker device, that's considered its own network. And you can tie these all together using VPN tunnels. You can obviously have switches and different things. I'm going to go ahead and select my lab environment here real quick. So if I look at my lab environment, I have my VPN device. I also have a switch. I also have my wireless capabilities, and I have my systems manager all within my lab, right? That's considered a single network. But if I go look at my appliance, you can see I have the ports. It tells me which ports I have things plugged into. And the other thing that I wanted to show you here is the site-to-site VPN. So right now I'm configured in a hub mode. So my traffic, basically my teleworker is a spoke off of this hub, and my ICE in AWS deployment with that virtual MX is also a spoke. And I did that just because I don't want all my traffic to go out and exit through AWS, and they're gonna, charge me a bunch of money for that. So I try to make sure everything goes in and out of this as a hub. And so you can actually see down here as well, I have my remote VPN participants. So there's my ICE in AWS to talk to ICE over that secure tunnel. And then there's my teleworker Thomas appliance as well. So I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of that. I'm not going to do any more kind of access control demos because, like I said, the MXs don't really, that's not their specialty. So I'm not going to bother to show it to you. They can do .1x and MAB, pretty basic though. So with that, I'm going to get back here and get onto the telecommuter box. So we're going to do a quick wired and wireless demo of, just a Windows machine doing your basic PEEP authentication, wired and wireless on this box. And then we'll get into wireless. So I've got a virtual machine sitting here. Let's wake it up. All right. So what I'm going to do real quick is I am going to plug in to my teleworker box. And we should see, there we go. As soon as it gets plugged in, we get prompted for 802.1x. And so I'll put in Thomas and my credentials, enter that. And hopefully, there we go. We should be on a network now. We'll go check ICE. And while we're here, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to fire up the Wi-Fi as well. Let's get that connected. Again, so we have our ICE Corp SSID that I've been broadcasting through that. I'm going to go ahead and connect into that, and I'm going to use my same credentials, hopefully. Okay, I put my credentials in earlier, so it automatically connected me. So let's go take a look at ICE now. And we can see my authentications, hopefully. There we are. Okay, so you can see the first time I plugged in Thomas, I authenticated with my corporate environment and against my internal users database, and it authorized me as an employee. And you can see I was coming in on my teleworker Thomas device. And then you can see I had this other wireless connection that I made. I have a little wireless USB dongle that I'm connected through the TP link here. And that did the same authentication basic as the basic PEEP MS Chat V2 connection, also authorized me as an employee on my teleworker Thomas. So again, on that little teleworker box. So let's switch over to that network view. And let's go look at the appliance status. Okay, so you can see I plugged in the PC here, and you can see here's that desktop computer that we've got in. It also recognized the SSID as ICE Corp. Everything's there. Really neat way to look at the box and see what's going on. Great way to get people connected remotely. Really fast and easy. So there's that. Next, let's talk about wireless. So when it comes to wireless, the Meraki APs have a lot of different SSIDs you can configure. I think the Z series that I just showed you, that one has up to 4 SSIDs. I only provisioned 1 of the 4, but a regular MR access point can do up to 15. So depending upon what you're trying to do, you have a lot of flexibility there. I think the reason why they offer so many SSIDs is because that's really the way they do access control. Is each method of access control is done per SSID in Meraki. So you have your different choices here for if you just want to have an open default network, if you need to have a pre-shared key for more of a hotspot guest access. Maybe you have some devices that need MAB, maybe you have some things that need .1x. Each one of these is going to need a different SSID. And this is where what's nice with ICE and Radius is you could use multiple protocols, multiple options with a single SSID. So if you find yourself with a lot of different SSIDs doing all of these different capabilities, that's where ICE could potentially help you, is the ability to kind of consolidate all of those and do multiple functions all within a single SSID. So that's something you may want to consider. So when we start to look at the enterprise authentication options, because that's really where ICE fits, right? The first thing is that Meraki Cloud authentication. That has the ability to work with several different identity stores, and that basically will allow your users to connect to a sign-on page, or what they call the splash page. And inside of that, Meraki will basically do 802.1x for you to authenticate your device. My Radius server, that's where ICE comes in. You are going to specify ICE as your Radius server, and that gives you the option to do any number of different authentication mechanisms or talk to multiple different backend stores with your 802.1x connections. And then finally, there's another option they offer called local auth. And that's actually an interesting one because the wireless access point will act as not only the authenticating device, the authenticator, but it will be the Radius service, right? It will actually send Radius, or sorry, it'll do 802.1x, and then it will talk like the Radius server would to your LDAP server on the back end. So it can actually have a direct connection to LDAP there. It's a fantastic scenario if you've got a small or remote office out somewhere. You don't want to deploy something like an ICE out there, and you have that LDAP connectivity. But it has another interesting options where if for some reason the LDAP connectivity goes away, it can actually cache the credentials of your users coming into that AP. And if there's an outage, it can still let them on the network, even if it can't talk to the LDAP server. So I thought that was a really interesting failover scenario that Meraki supports with that local auth capability, if that happens to solve any of your particular needs or scenarios. So if you if you do need to use that Meraki splash page to do a login, this is what it looks like. Pretty simple, but you do have the option to do some customizations in terms of the colors and the layout, and you can do a full-on, HTML, CSS edit of all these different pages in the flow, which is pretty nice. So when you do choose your different splash page options, you've got these different identity stores that you can use for your splash page. One is obviously the MyRadius server, and that would be ICE. And we also have another option down there if you want to use it as a ICE, if you want to use the ICE guest portal and redirect them there. So those are the different options you would use with ICE. So I did mention that the splash page customizations, Meraki lets you not only control the colors, but there's an editor. I don't think it's quite, you can't quite see it on the screen here, but there's an editor that lets you edit the HTML and the CSS and everything to do the customizations. What I wanted to show you here was on the right-hand side, you can see what the guest access option page looks like in ICE. Just the sheer number of options in terms of the flow, how you want your guests to, see a particular screen, progress to a success screen, or change their password, or all these different options in terms of their sponsor or the registration, right? There's many different options in ICE. And so if you want or are looking for more flexibility in your guest access or how people register their devices, that may be another use case for you to use ICE instead of the built-in Meraki splash page. All right, so that's all I wanted to mention for the wireless features. I am going to demo the wireless MR capability real quick, but before I do that, I actually want to talk about Systems Manager because I'm going to demo the MR with Systems Manager. So I'm going to plug in my access point here real quick just to make sure it's powered up and ready to go. I unplugged it earlier because I want to make sure I authenticated to the teleworker box because they're both broadcasting the exact same SSID. I want to make sure I connected to the teleworker box first. So I'm going to disconnect my teleworker box, and I'm going to power up my AP, and we'll be able to do the next demo. So here we go, Meraki Systems Manager. So if you're not familiar with mobile device management or enterprise mobility management software, that's exactly what we're talking about. Meraki is one of many vendors that do this, that are supported by ICE. And so when your users and your devices come in, we have the ability to do compliance or posture checking on these devices to make sure they're pin locked and not jailbroken and they don't have any crazy apps on them. Or if this is a corporate asset that you give to your employees or your students, that you can control it and make sure it has the necessary not only security parameters, but the required applications that you want for your employees or your students, right? So it can do all of that for you, and then depending upon how they come in, we can authorize it or not. So Systems Manager has a variety of ways of getting installed onto your users' devices. So you can send them QR codes, or you can send them SMS messages, or have them downloaded in a browser providing a specific code, things like that. So lots of different ways to get your users and their devices connected to SM to start the provisioning process. And once you do that, what you're looking at doing is you are provisioning profiles that the mobile operating system, whether it's iOS or Android or even the desktop operating systems, they all kind of work in the same way, where you can provision system settings that will enforce certain requirements or limitations or configuration settings. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using Systems Manager to provision a Wi-Fi setting. I've actually already provisioned it, but I'm just going to show you what I did to configure it, because in order to talk with Azure Active Directory, I need a very specific type of authentication protocol that you can't do manually on an iPhone. You can't or an iPad, you can't configure it by hand. You must provision it with a profile, and that's what we've done. So with that, let's do our little demo. So like I said, I've got my iPad here, connecting to the Meraki Wireless AP, going through ISE, doing authentication against Azure Active Directory, and then hopefully we'll get authenticated and show you all that it works. So I'm going to open up my iPad here, and I'm going to, oh, that's what I wanted. There we go. So you can see, here's my iPad. I'm going to show you the profile that I provisioned. So if you go down to VPN and device management right here, you can see that under mobile device management, there's a Meraki systems manager, and my Meraki organization is called Thomas, and so that's why it says Thomas there. And if you go inside of there, you can see that this profile contains multiple settings inside of there for mobile device management, a Wi-Fi network, and a certificate. So let's take a look inside of that by checking on more details. And so now you can see, I don't know if it's going to highlight right there. If you look at the Wi-Fi settings, you can see it ties it to the ICE Corp SSID or network, and we're going to do WPA2 encryption on there. And I'm going to show you what the specific protocol settings are. If I drill down into there, it won't tell you anything about the specific protocol, but I'll show you what that looks like on the systems manager side. And then you can see I provisioned some certificates and things like that, so that it knows it has certificates that we need to trust to talk to Meraki, to provision software, do whatever. So all that's in here. And if you wanted to authenticate this device, it has a device identity certificate as well. So with that, let's go back to Wi-Fi. And you can see, just because I have that profile in there, that this ICE Corp SSID automatically pops up in my networks, right? So if I click on that or touch it, it's going to automatically join. Now it's cached my credentials because I joined it previously, and I should now be able to go into ICE. If I refresh, here it is. So it automatically authenticated me very quickly. So here you can see I'm coming in, and now I am going to the, I have a vanilla ICE Azure Active Directory domain or tenant configured. It configured me as a vanilla ICE employee, authorized me as an employee. You can see I'm coming in on my Meraki MR46 in my lab. And if I go back, I just want to show you what protocol we were using when we did this. So here's all the authentication information. If I scroll down, you can see that the identity store that we used was Azure Active Directory, and I'll go show you what that configuration looks like as well. And here is what's special with the systems manager is I told the systems manager that I wanted to talk to ICE using the EAP-TTLS app protocols because that's what's required in order for ICE to give your credentials to Azure Active Directory and perform an authentication, right? So that's what's special here. And that's what we had to use Systems Manager for, is for that particular protocol. Otherwise, the only option you have with with iOS devices or even Mac OS desktops, the only option you have is basically PEEP. You have to do, if you want TLS, EAP-TTLS, you need to provision a profile. So then the last thing I wanted to show you on the ICE side is I wanted to show you that Azure Active Directory and also show you my policy configuration. So under administration, I went to external identity sources. And down here, you see we have this REST ROPC. ROPC is it's basically a method inside of OAuth or Resource Owner Protocol. I forget what the last part stands for. But inside of there, you can see I configured, and I'll make it a little larger for you, Azure Active Directory Vanilla ICE tenant. And so here's my Azure AD information, and you can see my little suffix down there where I authenticate. And then over on this tab under groups, you can see that I've loaded the groups from Azure and said these are the groups that I want to be able to authenticate with in ISE. And then if I go into my policies, you can see where I have used those. I didn't make any changes, so that's good. So I have my corporate SSID, so I'm coming in either wired or wireless 802.1x. So you can see in ICE I have this one policy that's been basically doing all of my 802.1x transactions here today. If I have wireless, as long as it ends with the corp or corporation SSID name, it will use one of these protocols and it will go through these rules. So if we're doing Azure Active Directory and it's in the employees group, then we will authenticate as an employee, or they could be a contractor in Azure Active Directory. That's fine also. Or we also have the ability to do it with the internal ICE internal user group, and that's what I did for my first scenario with the Z3. I just did that because since I'm all in the cloud, I don't have an Active Directory to talk to. I don't have an Active Directory in my lab. So I just used the ICE internal database to do that one. And that's how easy it was to configure this in ICE. So last thing, oh, we gotta show you Systems Manager before I forget. I knew there was something I was forgetting. Okay, so Systems Manager, let's go into our lab. That's where the Meraki access point lives. And let's go to Systems Manager. And what I did to provision my iPad is I created a device profile, and you can create device profiles or user profiles. The real one here was the user profile because I wanted to make it specific for me so that I could create a username and a password as part of my wireless profile. So I just click on that. There's some basic information that you can configure, and you can actually filter for devices that you want to deploy to. I'm just using it on my demo iPad here. And what you do is you add settings, these different profiles. And so I added ICE Corp as my SSID. Let's go take a look at that. And this is the wireless profile I configured. So we're looking for an SSID named ICE Corp. If I wanted, I could have it automatically join this SSID. I didn't because I wanted to be the option of choosing other ones. And then obviously for security, you want to be able to do WPA2, but you have other options there as well. And then, like I said, in order to talk to Azure Active Directory, I need to do EAP-TTLS using PAP as my inner authentication method, right? So I chose PAP, and then I left the username and password open so that I could fill in those credentials in my iPad. If I locked it down, then I wouldn't be able to customize it for doing different users or something in my demo. So that's pretty much it. And then I deployed it out to my device, and you can monitor it. There you go. There's my demo iPad. If we take a look at it, you can basically see, where it's at. You can look at the different management capabilities that Systems Manager provides you, and then you can see what has been provisioned to it in terms of the profiles. You can even do an application inventory, see what's there. Maybe something's there that it shouldn't be, or if you are trying to push something to it and it's missing, like we're not missing anything. We're all good. And then finally, how's it doing? Is it checking in? Is it deploying the profile like you expected, or is something going wrong with it? So it has all these different logs and things for you to play with and understand. So hopefully that gives you a good intro to Meraki Systems Manager, and that's something you guys found interesting. The next thing we want to do is we want to get into wired, because there's, I'm sure a lot of you have switches that you care about and want to configure. So the way we do this is using access policies, and the access policies work very much like the identity-based networking service templates inside of our traditional Catalyst switches. So the only difference is that you're doing it in a GUI rather than on a command line. And so you can specify that you want to do a radius server. You put in, one or more radius servers here, and then you can do radius testing. I love being able to do the radius test. That way you get a probe that checks to make sure it's alive or not. We talked about it having radius change of authorization support, so you can turn that off or on. Of course, you'd want it on, I would think. And then the way Meraki works when they do their enforcement is all you need to do is send back a filter ID inside of ISE, and it will basically tell Meraki the name of the group policy that they should be enforcing on that switch port or that wireless session, and they'll go ahead and enforce that. And then we have these different host mode options like multi-domain, multi-auth, things like that, so that depending upon how you want to authenticate your users and devices in a particular environment, you have that flexibility in those different options. Then the other thing they offer is something they call hybrid authentication, which is similar again to what you can do on the Catalyst, where you can choose to do 802.1x and MAB and kind of fail over from one to the other, or even do both at the same time. They have that same capability, and they call it hybrid authentication, or you can just choose to do .1x or MAB. So those are all the different things you can do with their access policies. The other part of the policy, I'll call it, is something called adaptive policy. That's their fancy term for doing scalable group tags or security group tags, something we've been calling TrustSec for over a decade here at Cisco. So this is basically a hardware capability that you get with the MS390s and the newer Wi-Fi 6 APs. And basically what this does is this will assign a group tag, which will actually insert a numeric tag in your Ethernet frames as they flow over the wire. So this is a wire rate thing. That's why the hardware needs to support it. And using that, it has the ability to then filter and determine which tagged frames are able to talk to which devices on the network. So if you think about every endpoint coming into your network, getting authenticated by ICE, being assigned a specific tag or group, that will determine what other groups or tags it's allowed to talk to on the network. And you can assign these. The most common way, obviously, is using ICE with 802.1x or MAC authentication bypass to assign a tag to a user or device. You can also do it statically for a particular user group, or you can do it statically by switch port or with a particular set of IP ranges. This is all very similar to how TrustSec is done on the traditional Cisco Catalyst lines. And in fact, it's fully compatible with TrustSec on all the other Cisco hardware that supports it. So if you want to do an enterprise deployment, you could even think about doing Meraki at your edge to do software-defined segmentation, and you can integrate it with a Catalyst switch, and it would be fully compatible and be able to do the tagging and things. So that's a really cool thing. Now, typically the way we manage these policies, these group-based policies in ICE, is using what we call the TrustSec policy or matrix. And the way this works is you have a set of source groups and destination groups, and where they intersect that cell, that determines the policy. And usually it's a permit or a deny for all traffic. But sometimes you can see the blue ones there. That's called block malware. If you take a look inside of there, I'm sorry it's a little small. I should have made it a little taller for you. But the idea is inside of there, you can create a custom access control list just for that interaction between those groups. And in this case, we have configured an access control list that should look a little bit different to you because it doesn't have IP addresses. This is the beauty of the group-based tagging with TrustSec, is that you don't have to worry about your IP addresses. We don't care about IP addresses because we don't care where you live on the network. We don't care what your IP address is. All we care about is, are you a member of a specific group, and what are you trying to talk to? What other group are you trying to talk to? Or who's trying to send traffic to you? Is that allowed or not, based on the permit, the deny, or this access control list? So it greatly simplifies your access control list needs, because it's a much shorter list, because we don't have to list all the different permutations of subnets and things. And then when it comes to the creating the different policies and the interactions between them, we have that TrustSec matrix in the ISE GUI, but in Meraki, they have these adaptive policies that you can configure, and you can see some of them. You can say, I want my employees to always talk to my network services, but I want to block some of that traffic. I want to do some custom ACLs. I want to make sure my employees and my guests, they shouldn't be talking to each other, because if somebody comes in and has a piece of malware, they're infected, that means they could potentially spread it to other BYOD or guest devices. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to block those ports, like the Microsoft's SMB port 445, that it seems to be the number one malware vector since the beginning of time. So we have the ability to block that with our custom ones. And then in some cases we can say, you know what, employees should never talk to anybody in quarantine. That's just a bad idea. We're just going to block that altogether, right? So those are the different kinds of things that we can do with these adaptive policies. And then what that does, like I said, is it helps you to simplify your policies across your entire network or different branches, because you don't care about the individual IP addresses in the tens or hundreds or thousands of branches that you have. All you care about is what group do the individual users and devices belong to in those branches, and who can they talk to. So it can greatly simplify your policies if you're having to deal with a lot of ACLs, traditional ACLs. All right, so with that, I want to plug some devices in here real quick. I got some Raspberry Pis. I've got some cameras. I got my Apple TV. We got a bunch of different things in here we're going to plug in. We'll just see what pops up in the dashboard. See how much time we have, how much we can authenticate in a short amount of time here, and we'll go from there. So one more thing I want to plug in, and I want to plug in my Windows device, and let's see what we got. All right, let's wake up our Windows device, and we're going to plug it in, and it should come up here. There we go. Attempting to authenticate. We're going to be Thomas. So that should authenticate just fine. Good. We're going to go take a look in ICE, make sure that looks good. Yeah, so coming in, Thomas, went to the internal users database. You can see I'm coming in on my MS390. That's all good. So then let's go into the dashboard. Let's take a look at my switch. Oh, one more thing I wanted to show you real quick. I knew there was something I was forgetting. I want to take a look at the authentication details, because I want to show you that adaptive policy assignment. So, basic authorization we're looking for, but if you scroll down and look at some of the details, this is where it gets interesting. So we're just doing a regular PEEP authentication, nothing fancy. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, so I told you that Meraki does their group-based policies on filter IDs. So you can see here's that employee name that I assigned to Meraki, so it knows to apply the employee group policy. And check it out. Here's that Cisco AV pair for the security group tag number 4. That should be for the employees. And so now if we go flip over and we look at, oops, it's in my web browser still. We look over here at our MS390. You can see all the different devices I've plugged in, and we can start to see some different devices. And this should be my employee right here. And plugged them into, port 9. So port 9 right there is an employee. And notice this is the adaptive policy group. So it knows that we should be tagging this Windows workstation as an employee device and giving it the permissions to talk to other users and devices with that. So I think that's about all I have time for. I think I'm over time actually. So the last thing I want to mention, I just want to go back to my presentation and remind you that a lot of the Meraki stuff has APIs to help you configure it. If you go to devnet or developer.cisco.com, you can actually look at the APIs. They break it down really nicely for all the different products and devices like I was showing you today. They have Ansible playbooks, and that's how I was able to configure my lab. So I provisioned this today. I built an Ansible playbook to build out my Amazon Web Services environment where I can have my Icebox communicating securely through the VMX, which can talk through my MX and my wired and wireless switches and APs, or the Z3 in its own little environment, right? So everything you saw today was all running in the cloud. We were configuring it with Meraki Dashboard. We were authenticating against Azure Active Directory. So hopefully, if you guys are interested in doing this, you can go to my GitHub repository, take a look at the code on how to do that for yourself. And with that, I'll leave you with some resources and see if there's any other additional questions, Rigo.
Great presentation, Thomas. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the Q&A window here, and our panelists have done a amazing job of addressing the questions. So huge thanks to our panelists. I do see that we have one final question, and I think we can squeeze it in here before we
Yeah.
wrap up. And for the question here is, where is the policy enforcement point for Meraki AP between two endpoints on different APs? Is it on the uplink port of sending AP towards the attached switch, or on, and I believe this is egress port switch connected to destination AP?
Okay. So it depends. If you're using traditional access control lists, right, it would be on the access control list of the ingress. Um, and then if it gets past that, then it's up to whatever other network devices are in the network to stop it, block it, let it go, whatever, right? If we're talking about scalable group tags, security group tags, TrustSec, that technology does the enforcement at the egress. Okay, so in the example that you just gave, they said, a user going from one AP to another AP or from one switch to another switch. The enforcement would happen at the egress point. So the sender would just send it from its source, and it's free to go wherever. And then when it's arriving at its destination, that's when uh, the other AP or switch in this case would look and see, okay, this packet at an IP level is destined for my host over here, but its group tag and this other group tag are, they're allowed or they're not allowed, or it can be as long as it's this port, those kinds of things. So those are or this protocol. So those are the kinds of checks that happen with software-defined segmentation using TrustSec. So hopefully that answers the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Mhm.
Thomas. So with that final question and answer, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar presentation for today.